Hi, my name is Amanda Kelly. Today we're going to discuss maintaining client dignity. We're going to specifically review an article, The Right to Effective Behavioral Treatment by Van Houten and colleagues in 1988. This is what the article looks like, and it can be downloaded online. 1988, published in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. The full list of authors is Ron Van Houten, Sal Axelrod, John Bailey, Judith Favell, Richard Fox, Brian Iwata, and Lovas. The author's purpose in writing the article was so that individuals who are recipients or potential recipients of treatment designed to change their behavior have the right to a therapeutic environment, services whose overriding goal is personal welfare, treatment by a competent behavior analyst, programs that teach functional skills, behavioral assessment and ongoing evaluation, and access to the most effective treatment procedures possible. We're going to go through those in greater detail in the additional slides forthcoming. Let's talk about number one, an individual who has a right to a therapeutic environment. Therapeutic environment is defined as a physical and social environment that is safe, humane, and responsive to an individual's needs. Therapeutic environment also means access to therapeutic services, leisure activities, and materials that are enjoyable and instructive for the client. We want to take into consideration client preferences as well as the age appropriateness of the materials that we're using. This includes reinforcers. Let me give you a scenario from a case in which I consulted on earlier on in my career. I was working with a 10-year-old student. His favorite music was Barney. I love you, you love me. Children's music. Obviously not something that was really appropriate for a 10-year-old if he were considered to be typically functioning. Now, this child's sibling was around, younger sibling, and his friend was over. The friend said to the brother, why does he listen to this music? Why does he listen to something that's so babyish? And the brother tried to defend, his brother. And at the same time, the other child wasn't trying to necessarily be rude or off-putting, but was sincerely inquisitive and just curious as to why his brother, who was older than them, would enjoy music that was much younger than something they themselves would enjoy. This was really the impetus or the fire for me, the catalyst, to approach the family and say, hey, listen, would you be interested in us exploring potential other reinforcers for this individual? Absolutely, says the family, no problem. We'd love to see him more included by his brothers and his brothers' friends who come into the house. Again, very loving, very caring environment, but children are children and they have the questions that they have. So we engaged in a pairing program where we would take music that had a similar beat and rhythm to that song, which as unbelievable as it is, was a rap song that had the same sort of beat. Dun, 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 dun. And we were able to show or provide access to it for the client. And he was happy as could be. So in just exposing him to something that was more age appropriate, I certainly was not disregarding the client's preferences and not wanting to make sure that he was himself happy or enjoying access to that reward. But also now through that pairing and through that transfer, we were able to give him access to reinforcers that were more age appropriate and therefore attracted others in his environment and encouraged more increased interaction. Let's refer now to the BACB Ethical Code, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. 2.09 is about treatment intervention and efficacy, which states that clients have a right to effective treatment based on research. Behavior analysts always have the obligation to advocate for and educate clients about scientifically supported, most effective treatments available. Effective treatment procedures have been validated as having been both long-term and short-term benefits to clients and society. So something that will have change that will sustain itself over time. An adequate environment, when we're talking about clients, we want to make sure that they're having access to a therapeutic environment. We just discussed what therapeutic might look like. To say an adequate environment or definition of environment, we want to include parents, teachers, and staff who are responsible for competent, responsive, and caring interventions. We also describe an adequate environment as one that has frequent positive interactions that are directed towards enjoyment of learning and developing fostering independence for the client. The adequate environment imposes the fewest restrictions possible, but still ensuring individual safety and development. The definition of least restrictive here is looking at the freedom of an individual to move and access preferred activities rather than the type or the location of their placement of services. The BACB Ethical Code 4.09 states least restrictive procedures. Behavior analysts review and appraise the restrictiveness of procedures and always recommend the least restrictive procedures that are likely to be effective. When you look at federal law, the Code of Federal Regulations of IDEA, the Individual Disability Education Act, it states that individuals should have access to the least restrictive, most effective interventions. So, to have a child mainstreamed in the general education classroom with 30 other students, if they are not making progress, may be the least restrictive, but is not the least restrictive environment that's being the most effective. Those two really need to be considered together, and they do go hand in hand. 4.10 from the BACB ethical guidelines state that we should avoid harmful reinforcers. This is important for direct level technicians as well as behavior analysts who are designing and overseeing programs. Behavior analysts and direct level technicians minimize the use of items as potential reinforcers that could be harmful to the health or the development of the client, or that may require excessive motivating operations to be in place. Let me explain what that means. When we're talking about harmful reinforcers, we could be talking about things like cigarettes, nicotine, caffeine, sugar, fat-laden foods using edible reinforcers. It's not that we can't use those, it's that we want to make sure we're minimizing the use of them, that we're using them only when they need to be, and that we're not requiring excessive motivating operations to be in place. What that means is that in order for an individual to find something reinforcing, if they have to be in a state of deprivation, if they have to be incredibly hungry or incredibly starved, then that would be something that might be considered harmful, and we'd want to avoid that if possible. The second right an individual has is the right to services with overriding goal is personal welfare. The benefit needs to be the client, the individual, and those around them. The purpose of behavioral treatment, it's to provide access to interventions to help develop skills, to assist individuals in acquiring skills that are both functional and will promote independence. You want to make sure that we're encouraging our clients to be able to develop and do these skills without additional support. Thinking about children who you may be working with, those children will become teenagers, those teenagers will become adults, and those adults will become the elderly. We want to make sure that we are taking immediate and long-term welfare into consideration. Peer review and human rights committees have an important part in ensuring that adequate, effective, non-harmful interventions are being available to our clients. In cases that involve potential risk, a peer review committee may play a distinct role in protecting the client's welfare. Peer review committees are made up of experts in behavior analysis. They impose professional standards to determine our clinical protocols, sort of the way in which we do things. And an example here would be the BACB Ethical Code. In contrast, a human rights committee is made up of consumers, advocates, and others in the community who impose those standards, community standards, to determine the social significance of our programs. For example, living and working in warm climate temperatures such as Hawaii, teaching individuals to put on their shoes and tie their shoelaces and making sure that they do that before they can go certain places may not be something that is part of the community standard if things like flip-flops and sandals would be also appropriate. Really, when we're talking about peer review and human rights committees, we're talking about behaviors that are much more serious or severe or pose a safety risk. But when we talk about community standards and the culture of where you are working or where your client is living, that shoe example would be a relevant one for us. The third right an individual has is the right to a treatment by a competent behavior analyst and a competent behavior analytic team. The definition of a competent behavior analyst, well, professionals who are responsible for delivering, directing, or evaluating treatment. Those would be behavior analysts, hopefully, in these situations. We want to make sure that they possess the appropriate education and experience. Same is true for direct level technicians. You want to make sure that you are given competence or that you are giving support through developing competence and working with certain behaviors, certain clients, or under certain circumstances before you are expected to perform in those circumstances. Clinical competence requires adequate practicum training and supervision. If you are a direct level technician and don't feel that you have adequate level of training and supervision for an incoming case or for a case that you are on, it is your ethical duty and responsibility to advocate for additional training and support. Competence is also defined by having experiences that are similar, as we mentioned, similar situations. And in many states, we're looking at certification and licensure as being additional requirements. There, at this time, are over 20 states that require additional restrictions or place additional restrictions on the practice, and that is something that you want to be aware of depending on where you live. When we're looking at complex treatments or treatments that could really increase the risk to an individual, in those cases, we would say that the individual has a right for direct involvement and perhaps direct services by a doctoral level behavior analyst or BCBA-D. PhD level behavior analysts should have expertise and they should be able to detect, analyze, and manage aspects of the assessment and treatment process in a way that ensures safety and minimizes the risk. The fourth right, an individual has a right to programs that teach functional skills. Skills that you can do, skills that you can use, skills that will open your world up to potential reinforcers. The ultimate goal for services is to increase the availability for individuals to access reinforcement. You want to be able to access reinforcement the way that it occurs in the natural environment. Not everyone's going to be walking around with pennies and tokens and providing them contingent on a particular response in the natural environment. However, when you hold a door open for somebody, often they will say thank you or they will hold the door for you. That is what we're talking about. That may be a reinforcer that may increase your behavior in the future, and it does occur naturally in the environment. We want to make sure that the functional skills we are teaching pivotal skills. So skills that will open up your whole world into a plethora of other reinforcers in those natural environments. Learning to talk, learning to read, learning to drive opens many, many more doors for us. We're also looking to acquire skills or behaviors that allow the individual to reduce unpleasant situations. So for you and I, if there's something we want to avoid, we can walk away from it, we can shut the door, we can turn off the stove and rinse the pot if it's burning. We want to make sure that we are encouraging and promoting that level of independence for our clients as well, that will allow them the right and access to just be themselves, to be having the rights that all of us have. When we're talking about programs that teach functional skills, we want to make sure that we're also eliminating dangerous behaviors or behaviors that are barriers to success. Dangerous behaviors, of course, could be aggression or self-injurious behavior, but behaviors that are barriers to success could be an inability to focus or not having been taught to attend to relevant stimuli in the environment, scripting behaviors that may just be competing, or other sensory or automatic behaviors. As a member of society, every individual has a right to access services that allow them to develop skills that will benefit not only themselves but the community in which they live. The fifth right is an individual's right to a behavioral assessment and ongoing evaluation. Prior to services beginning or being implemented, individuals should have an assessment that is comprehensive and complete. This includes a functional analysis or functional behavior assessment, which emphasizes the importance of antecedent and consequences in the environment that surround the behavior. An initial behavioral analysis should be performed in these 3 stages. First, you're going to conduct an interview. Interviews will involve asking questions and circumstances such as when does the behavior always occur? When does it never occur? When is it more likely to occur? What could you do to make the behavior occur right now? What do you do to make the behavior stop? We're going to be asking respondents, individuals who are working with or who are related to our clients and know them well. Second, we're going to conduct direct observations of those individuals, and we're going to do so under varied and relevant circumstances. It's not necessarily helpful to observe a client in one situation where problematic behaviors don't occur or are not reported to occur, and to do multiple observations in that situation or setting. It is important that we are conducting direct observations and that we're not just basing information off the reports of the respondents from the interviews that we had conducted prior to our observations. We want to make sure that we're looking at varied situations so that we can see what success looks like, what non-success looks like, and what it looks like in its most difficult situation. Finally, your assessment findings should then be incorporated and a systematic treatment plan should be developed. That systematic treatment plan should be written down, and everyone who's responsible for implementing that plan should be trained on doing so. Ongoing evaluation is crucial. It's not necessarily important enough to just do an initial assessment. It's actually never sufficient enough to just do the initial assessment. The initial assessment is to guide us for where we are going to start. Where we go from there should be evaluated on an ongoing basis. We want to make sure that evaluations include reviewing objective data and that we are looking at the effects of the treatment and any unanticipated problems. Sometimes things occur that we didn't anticipate or could not anticipate, even with the appropriate protections in place. They recommended timeline for graphing and displaying behavior rates and skills is 2 weeks. So looking at data visually displayed on a minimum of a 2-week basis should help us catch any unanticipated problems and to help mitigate or reduce any challenges associated with that intervention. If changes are needed, the treatment plans should then be modified, and behavior analysts are responsible for making those changes in a timely manner and for looking at their changes to be based on data and sharing the data regularly with any member of the treatment team or all members of the treatment team. The sixth and final right that I mentioned here in this article is an individual has the right to the most effective treatment procedures available. Individuals are entitled to effective and scientifically validated treatment. There is new information occurring every day, so it's really important to stay on top of the research. As our fields grow, as our need for our services grow, we have access and opportunities to conduct more research and gain more information. We want to make sure that we have a healthy dose of philosophic doubt and that we're constantly questioning what we know as fact. However, we should also make sure that we are only recommending interventions that have current scientific support for them. Exposing an individual to a restrictive procedure is completely unacceptable unless it can be shown that they are necessary for safe and clinical significant behavior change. You want to make sure that there's a system for evaluating them on an ongoing basis and a procedure for how you're going to fade those restrictive supports. Going back to the BACB guidelines, 6.01 says, above all other professional training, behavior analysts uphold and advance the values, ethics, and principles of the profession of behavior analysis. So if you're a behavior analyst or you're working with a behavior analyst who is also licensed or certified in another area, you want to make sure that in accordance with the BACB guidelines, first and foremost comes their ethical obligation and commitment to the field and the profession of behavior analysis. Behavior analysts have an obligation to participate in behavior analytic professional scientific organizations and activities, including state chapters. So state chapter ABA affiliates would be a great place to start. Reading the research, going to the conferences, and engaging with a verbal community. Objective and empirical evaluation, you want to make sure that you're kind of keeping your mind in that real objective place. Interventions are neither good nor bad. They're not right or wrong. They should either be considered effective, ineffective, helpful, or harmful. A word about the BACB guidelines. Well, as an individual who is either pursuing certification, is certified as a registered behavior technician, or as a behavior analyst, a board-certified behavior analyst at the assistant, the BCBA, or the doctoral level, we are responsible for being familiar with all of these ethical codes, which can be found at www.bacb.com. Lack of awareness or misunderstanding of a standard is not in itself a defense of misconduct or a violation. Now, it's very difficult to go through and memorize a plethora of pages of ethical guidelines with lots of large lingo and jargon. Actually, I think it's more important to think of a situation in which you have encountered or are currently encountering and run through the ethical codes with a scenario in mind. That will give them more life and will help you, I think, remember really the salient features and the guidance that's offered there. Thank you for taking the time to discuss and hear me discuss today the rights to effective behavioral treatment, maintaining client dignity. For more information, please download the Van Houten et al. 1988 article, as well as visit www.bacb.com and review the ethical guidelines that are listed there.